Okay, so hi everyone. So my name is Ana Guzman and I'll be the speaker today. Just quickly, I am a Latina woman with short hair and glasses, and behind me is LACMA. For people that have been there, this is the area where there's the patio, and there's sometimes the food trucks come here and you can mingle and you could sit down and talk and hang out. So I thought that this background would be good for today. So the land acknowledgement, NACMA respectfully acknowledges the Gabrieleño, Tongva, Gabrieleño, Kis, Fernandeño, Tataviam, and Ventureño Chumash people as the traditional land caretakers of Los Angeles County, the region this museum serves. We acknowledge this land as being the homeland of many indigenous people, past and present. Next slide. Next slide, Brian. Thank you. All right, so a little bit about you guys. I want to know where you're coming from. So I'm going to let you know a little bit more about me later on. But if you guys haven't already on the chat, if you can tell me your location, if you're with a school or an organization, who you're representing, and what content you teach. So I'd be happy to get to know you all. We have Mission Hills, Mammoth Lake, Mammoth Unified, Long Beach, Glendale, LA, Pepperdine, Los Angeles, Mission College. So we have a lot of people from Southern California. Anybody from, and we have Mammoth Lake Street too. We have New York. Awesome. UCLA. The Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. Awesome. ELAC. Pennsylvania. MOCA. We have a VTS moderator. Awesome. So a lot of people, thank you so much for joining us today and for making time for this topic. Next, Brian. So a little bit about me. I've been an art teacher since 2005. And a lot of people might be like, but what about TESOL, right? So a lot of my students, kind of like what Laura was saying, we have a lot of English language learners. So I thought, why not? I was during the pandemic and I'm like, well, why not learn how to teach more effectively to my students, which are primarily English language learners. I was interested later on in creating effective language learning programs for students. I think there's a lot of work to be done regarding English language learners, supporting teachers in their journeys and their professional development. And I still had the arts inclination. So I was interested in seeing how the arts can support language acquisition. And last but not least, I'm an English language learner myself. Next, Brian. So the objectives of the presentation today will be for you to familiarize yourself with some information regarding emerging bilinguals or English language learners. You'll be able to relate and analyze cognitive development to our practice and in relation to our practices. And last but not least, we're going to do the practical part of this and how can you apply it in your classroom, right? Or how can you help colleagues apply these in their classroom, okay? So before we start, I want to tell you about the needs. I want to tell you about the issue, about data that's available for us regarding English language learners, and some terminology that sometimes we as teachers, I was an art teacher, I wasn't a linguistics teacher or language teacher, an English teacher. So a lot of these terms were like, well, what is this, right? So we're gonna familiarize ourselves with some of this stuff. Next. So this is me in a nutshell. I was born in the 70s, late 70s. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And so I wanted to reflect and get you guys thinking about what you think an English learner is, right? Because a lot of us think, well, it's foreigners or immigrants, people who have recently come to the country. But you'd be surprised that a lot of English language learners are actually born here. So next. And it makes sense, right? Because a lot of our parents are the ones that immigrate. And so like myself, I'm first generation, but as a teacher, you don't really think about that. You think like, well, it's the people, I'm helping people who are just coming into the country, or I'm helping refugees, right? Or I'm helping a certain type of demographic in your head and your perception. But if you see the data here, 84% of pre-K to fifth grade English learners and 65% of middle and high schoolers are English learners that are born in the US. So that was me. I was born here, but I would have, my native language was Spanish. I was born, my parents didn't know English, so we just practiced Spanish at home. And then when I went to school, I learned English, which was my target language. Next. So I wanted to share some of the data that the Migration Policy Institute has in regards to this. So if you notice, in California, foreign-borns make up 27% of the population that are English language learners. So you have a big difference between, those were the foreign-born versus the US-born. So there's a big discrepancy. And if you notice, most of them are born here in the US. You also see on the bottom that children born in the US and California, you have 86% that are in the English, that are labeled English language learners in school. You have 86% in K through 5, 57% in 6 through 12, and that makes up of a total of 73% in California, which is where I teach and where I was born. But your numbers are different, depending on where you're located. And if you notice, I was interested in this too, because the last time that this was conducted was in 2018. So I went to their website and I saw the data, and it was 2018. Okay, next. So this is also from the same website, same year. This one is about the home languages, kind of like what I was saying, right? Like before I went to school, it was all Spanish. So Spanish is the predominant language spoken in California, which makes up 82% of the English language learners' homes. And that, after that, I would like you to see the number between, you have like approximately 1 million Spanish speaking families. And then the next one, the next predominant language is Vietnamese, and it goes to 27,000. Like, that's a big difference, right? You have 82% of English language learners versus the next is 2%. Next. This is the Department of Education. This is the national website of, right? So we have like information on California, we have information nationally, right? And so this one is telling us that there are close to 5 million English language learners. But again, you see the year, it's 2014, the last time that they have updated that information. Next. This is the Office of English Language Acquisition. And this one is showing us the 5 states with the highest percentage of English language learners. The first one being California, following it by Texas, New Mexico, Illinois, and Nevada. So if you are teaching in California, should we know something about teaching language to our students? I think so, right? So next. Oh, and the year, can you go back, Brian? Let's see the year, 2018. Next. This one is from the California of Education website. And this one is, I'm proud of them. This one's relatively very recent, 21-22. And this one says that kindergarten through 12, we have enrolled students that are designated English language learners. You have close to 6 million. You have close to 1 million that are current English learners. California's 5.9 million students. So the total is 6 million, sorry, and 1 million are the English learners. And then you have the reclassification. That's when, and I put it on the bottom, what does that mean? It means that they're redesignated, right, to proficient. So you have from 1 million students, only close to 960,000 that are being reclassified. So all this data, it made me think, right, when I was researching this stuff, and it made me think like, why isn't there more current national data, right? Because there's so many English learners in public school systems, right? And then we also were missing some data regarding transition to higher education. We do know graduation rates, right? We do know what percentage of students and what demographic, what population is going to higher ed, right? But we don't know about that transition area, that gap, like what's happening. We don't know a lot about the success in higher education and their experiences, like, because a lot of them aren't redesignated. So what's happening? And I'm finishing a mentorship with Los Angeles community colleges. And I was talking about this with my mentor, that there's not a lot of data to where professors in community colleges and higher ed can kind of visualize or see like where the students, right? Like what's happening in that transition. How are they redesignated? What's happening, right, with these students that are coming into schools? So it's interesting. And I think that there should be more work done regarding to more current information that we can use in the classroom. Next. So these are things that I wished I knew. This is my bucket list. This is like, wow, like I wish, because I was an art teacher. I was in my 20s and you have this romanticized idea and I'm just going to teach art and it's going to be amazing, right? So that's how you go into the school. You go into like, everybody loves art and it's going to be amazing. What you don't know is that a lot of the percentage of what you do is classroom management at first. You don't know too much about English language learning, special needs. You don't know a lot of things, right? So these are some things that I wish that I knew going into the classroom regarding English language learners. And I think that we're doing a better job at preparing our teachers now, but I received my my credential a while back. So they didn't tell us too much about this, right? And there's a lot of teachers, there's a lot of new teachers, but there's a lot of veteran teachers or teachers kind of in the middle, right, that probably haven't received that much information regarding English language learning and how students, bilingual students, multilingual students, how they learn, because this would be very helpful. So these are some terms that you might come across, and sometimes they get confusing. So dual language learning. Dual language learners are students that they're receiving content learning in two languages at the same time. So you have programs that are teaching English and Spanish, and they're teaching the content simultaneously. So these students are acquiring and grasping both languages, right, at the same time. English language learners, or they're also now called emergent bilinguals, are students that, like myself, we came with a native language and we learn a second language. We're acquiring a second language. So, in my case, it was Spanish. And then you have multilingual students. You have polyglots, right? You have students who know more than two languages. And so how do these students learn? Do they learn the same as monolingual students? They don't. So it'd be interesting and very beneficial for a teacher to know how these students learn, primarily because you want them to succeed, right? And you want to provide the best service and the best strategies that you can in the classroom. Next. So language acquisition, some things to know is that sometimes you're going to get an English language learner who's really quiet and you might think he's shy or she, she's just like scared or, so you might start getting assuming these ideas that might not be true. So students that are acquiring a second language usually go through a period called the silent period. The silent period is when students are absorbing. They're like a sponge. So they're absorbing a bunch of information that they might not be able to output to communicate that well yet. So you get that silent period. How long does it last? It might last a month, a couple months, years, because every learner is different. So patience and knowing how to engage students is very beneficial during this time. Student stigma, because when you're labeled an English learner, right? And this is a weird thing about this country, because I think it might be the only country where it's seen as a bad thing to be a bilingual person, to have an accent, right? To be able to communicate in more than one language. So you get this stigma that you're the other. So my experience, my parents were immigrants. And so in their very little knowledge of education, when they were coming, they're like, we want to provide the best education, right? So my dad primarily, he decided to send me to private school. So my dad, I say this because I wasn't labeled an English learner. I didn't go through those levels. I wasn't redesignated. So for a while, I'm like, I'm not even an English learner, right? Because yeah, there wasn't that stigma. But teaching, sometimes if you're low level or intermediate, students can be mean, you might get bullying. So there's this stigma behind it sometimes. And now it's like, they want to change the wording to emergent bilinguals, but students catch on, right? It's like, duh, it's like the same thing. It's an English learner. So, an emergent bilingual should be more empowering, but it all depends on the culture of the school, right? It depends on how we're enabling students and how we're empowering them and how we're helping them relate to other students and showing empathy, right? One towards the other. And the arts as support to English language learning, while I was in the classroom, while I was an art teacher, I saw this equity, right? That they might not find in other classes because the content might be difficult or because they're not understanding completely what is being taught in the class, because there might not be differentiated learning. I've done a lot of observations throughout my career. I've done observations of high schools and middle schools, preschools, and you'd be surprised how sometimes there's not, like we talk about this differentiated learning all the time, right? But there's still a lot of teachers that are teaching, it's very teacher-led. So the art room is a place where I feel that English learners feel they're equipped to be the same as others, because sometimes they're doing artwork or paintings or things that, they don't have to do a lot of writing or, but they can express themselves in other ways. So that kind of gives them a little bit more self-confidence. Next. What I wish I knew this guy. This dude is called John Cummins. And this guy talked about BICS and CALP. And a lot of you guys might be familiar with it, right? BICS is the basic interpersonal communication skills. It's this level where students they have these basic knowledge of language, right? And then you have CALP, which is the way, and these are both outputs, right? CALP is more cognitive, it's more academic, it's more like it takes a little bit longer. It takes about 7 years to acquire it, versus the BICS is it takes about 2 to 3 years to get this. So I wish I would have known this. I learned it in graduate school. Next. I wish I would have known about Stephen Krashen. Stephen Krashen, I'm a big fan. This guy has a lot of theories, and he's a linguist. And I actually saw him speak in person, and he talks about comics, how you can teach language using comic books. And you're like, that's crazy, right? But it's not that crazy, because he talks about a theory called the affective filter, which is on the screen on the right. Okay, and basically if you see affective filter, the affective filter is how students feel. So if students are scared of the teacher, if students are scared of the material, if students don't feel safe, that affective filter right? And then before the affective filter, you have comprehensible input. You have what you're trying to teach them, right? You're like, oh my God, like I want you to grasp this and this is really gonna help you. But if the student is limited, there's no confidence, no lack of self-esteem, stigmas, etc., trauma, etc., all of these things that, you know, we do want to create these safe learning experiences because we want to kind of like get rid of that affective filter so students are able to get that comprehensible input, right? And after the affective filter, language acquisition is obtained more easily. You can see the output after that. You can see the kids that they can like present, or they're willing to share, or they can write for you. And this is where like you're, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm getting it, right? But according to Crashing, the affective filter is super important in the classroom to lower that affective filter, right? So students feel safe, so students feel valued, so students feel seen, right? Because a lot of times we're busy and all these teachers, we're doing a great job, but sometimes you have like 100-something students, right? And it's like sometimes students are not seen. And then to your left, you have input, the comprehensible input. So this one says that you should teach students not really where their comfort level is, but a little bit higher. You should challenge them a little bit, but not enough, right? That the affective filter is going to go up. So you want to keep it to, and that's where it's really important for you to get to know your student, right? Because you might go too high or you might go too low, or you might be generalizing. You might be, oh yeah, most of my students are lower level, so I'm going to teach this. And so this other student's not feeling challenged, right? So comprehensible input is important to know as well. Next. I wish I would have known about the American Council on the teaching of foreign languages. And these are the standards that everybody, right? Nationally, these are the standards. And so there's 5 standards. It's not a lot, right? It's not like, I don't know about other states, but in California, there's tons of standards that we have to look at, and we gotta, right? We gotta get to know them. But this one, these are 5. The first one is communication. The second one bases itself on culture, kind of like exposing students to culture. The third one is connections, building those connections, right? Those relationships where the affective filter is lowered. The fourth one is comparisons. And the fifth one is communities. So building community is very important. And so the first 3 are the ones that that California is actually implementing at this moment. And so I'm very proud of California. We're doing good regarding changes in education, regarding standards. Next. I wish I also would have known the levels, right? Because you're like lower, intermediate, and then you have advanced. Okay, well, what does that mean? Like, right? Like, what does your novice student do, right? Well, your novice student can communicate and can basically, he's just like repeating what you say, right? But is he acquiring language, right? Intermediate students can create language. He can ask and answer simple questions. Then you have advanced where you can narrate, they can narrate and they can describe. You follow it with superior. Superiors can hypothesize. They can think abstractly. And they can handle linguistics in unfamiliar situations. And then you finally have distinguished, right? Which like, they were talking to us in this dual language immersion program that even some of us are like kind of getting to distinguish, right? We can kind of like move around. And if you notice, if you notice on the edges of these, it's like kind of blurry. What does that mean? It means you could be advanced and superior simultaneously, right? You can kind of show some sort of abstracts knowledge, right? But you're kind of more like leaning on the advanced level. So this one really relates and helps you distinguish between those levels and the level and the proficiency and what students are capable of doing. Next. This one's another kind of like, this one I like because it talks about the 4 language skills. What should we be teaching our students, no matter the content, right? What should we be teaching English learners? We should be teaching them to read, to listen, to speak, and to write. So this one kind of shows you what they can do regarding all of those language skills, regarding the novice, the intermediate, the advanced, and the superior levels. So again, they can read familiar information, basic information, versus intermediate. They can give you main ideas and pieces of information on familiar topics. If you go to advanced, they can now give a main message supporting details, right? They can kind of expand. And when you're superior, they can interpret, they can infer meaning from complex, academic, professional. This is where we want them to be, right? When they graduate, so they can succeed in higher education. Are students there when they graduate? I don't know. Next. I wish I would have known about WIDA. We're still not implementing it in California. I think a lot of East Coast states do implement it. It's very holistic and centered on the whole child. And I would like to talk because assessment is very important, right? So you're implementing the strategies, you're lowering the affective filter, you know the levels of your students, but then what do students do with, like, you're the one that knows how to use these standards, right? Like in California, the teacher, like, I have my standards, right? Like, and I have my standard and I copy it on the board and it's written in this like wonderful language that the administrator comes in and she's like, oh my God, high five, Anna. Like, you wrote your objective and your standard, you're doing awesome. But what do my students, what are my English learners, like, what do they do with that? Like, a lot of them, it's like, okay, whatever, right? So I think that besides assessing students, it's important for them to learn to self-assess themselves so they can know where they are, so they can know how they can better, right? So I love how WIDA does this with it's a can statements, I can do statements, and basically they can say you can read, you can use this level, like for example, level 2 beginning. I can match data or information with in source or genre. So it's very like, I can do that, right? I can follow multi-step instructions. I can match sentence level. It's very I versus teacher led versus like what I'm going to teach the students. Now it's like, well, what can I do? That's very empowering, especially for English language learners. Next. So, little break from the data and all this, right? Let's appreciate some art because we're at LACMA. I'm in LACMA right now. So next. So this is an image that I got, okay? It's called Party People. And so on the chat, I want you to tell me, so what do you see? So what do you see? And it could be anything. You could share whatever you want to share. What do you see? I'll give you maybe 3 minutes or 4 minutes if we need more time. So you can write on the chat what you see. Rosa says she sees a family celebration. Beautiful patterns, a family portrait. We have a family, mother, and a father. Phoebe, what makes you say it's a family mother and a father? Colorful fabrics. Catherine, what makes you think this is colorful fabrics? Julie says parents are blind to their child's outlook on life. Julie, what makes you think that? Elizabeth says a family with a child, it's a celebration, but the parents' faces are covered. Elizabeth, what makes you think it's their parents? What in the image makes you think they're celebrating? Lisa says hidden identity. Fatima says a family where only the child has eyes to see. Fatima, can you tell me more about that? These are all great. Thank you so much for sharing. Tomoko says 1970s. What makes you think it's the 1970s, Tomoko? Dana says the child is held, seems to want help. It's their look. Dana, can you elaborate more on that? Yvonne says a celebration, but adults are physically there, but not present. Elizabeth says the postures of the people resemble common family portrait postures. Balloons. See, I went to balloons and bright colored clothing give me the feel of a celebration of some sort. And you guys can answer each other or ask questions too, right? You guys, it's not just me. So if you guys have maybe like, why would you think that? What makes you think that? Maybe you can ask other people. Jesus says child does not recognize /know/remember their parents' faces. Child does not connect to parental background. Jeremy says adults who are not facing the fourth wall of society. You guys are all great comments. Good job. What is the artist's background? Is this autobiographical? You guys can all read everybody else's comments as well, right? So you can kind of see what everybody was thinking about this image. Great observations. Next. So I'll go back to our conversation after I finish with my wish list, right? So I wish I would have known about this guy too, Benjamin Bloom. This guy, we hear about him a lot. He's really popular right now. And he talks about ways of learning, right? Or levels, also skills. output. Next. So we mainly talk about, when it's regard to Bloom, we primarily talk about the cognitive domain. And this is where we kind of help, as teachers, we help ourselves to know, well, to help us determine the learning activities that we're going to do with our students and what we want them to do, right? So we want them to create. So what can I help them create? I want them to understand. So what am I going to do, right? So this helps our objectives as well, along with our standards. And these are some of the things. Remembering is recognizing and recalling facts. Understanding is what facts mean. Applying is applying the facts, rules, concepts, ideas. And so this one connected to English language levels, you go from novice to distinguished or superior, right? Students can now create. But is that true? Like, can a novice, that's an English learner, create? Right? So that was the cognitive domain, right? But what we forget, and Mike, my mentor, he's here with me today. Thank you. We have these discussions, and we were talking about this. And it's not just the cognitive domain, right? It's the affective domain and the psychomotor domain. Next. And this is the whole child, this is what we want, right? We want them to be lifelong learners. We want them that when they come out of the class to have skills that they can use throughout their lives, right? So is academics the only thing that's important? Because you might have a super smart person who speaks superior, distinguishedly, right? But can't cope, right? Can you go back, Brian? Thank you. There's a lot of students that, right, we're not balancing these domains. So I want you to keep that in mind when you're in the classroom, because it's important to balance these and to remember these. Psychomotor, reflex movement, basic fundamental movement, perceptual, physical activities, skilled movements, right? That a lot of times, sometimes our students are lacking as well. Next. So going back to party people, right? You're like, what the heck? So she didn't even talk, she didn't answer me, right? I think Elizabeth, Billy asked the background and stuff, and she's like, she didn't even answer me, right? Okay, so now we're here. So in the art class, in the art room, without you guys knowing, with you guys doing this one activity that took 5 minutes, just looking at an image, right? This is what you guys did. Congratulations. Give yourself a pat on the back, high five. You guys were creative, right? You guys talked about the lines, the patterns, all of these things. You guys did some critical thinking because you developed an idea, you wrote it on the chat. You have some knowledge of semiotics and you were deciphering interpretation. Some people were telling me that the balloons were cut and this meant something, right? You had to have some self-confidence, because among so many people that are here today, it's like, you had to share on the chat. So some self-confidence and some sense of safety, right? That we have created here a sense of safety, where you're free to express yourself about what we were talking about. So thank you. Good job. You guys did all that stuff. Next. So these are the benefits of applying the arts to language learning, okay? These are tools that we teach in the art room all the time. and that you can teach as well, right? It doesn't have to be an image. It could be a picture of something scientific. It can be something history related. It could be something, it can even be math, right? What do we see in this like equation? Like, do we even understand? Like, what do we, right? Math is a language as well. So we can apply this stuff, what we learn in the art room, into any type of content. Tools that can promote lifelong learning, like self-confidence, like creativity. You have to have critical thinking skills. You have to be creative in some way because you're interpreting things and you're analyzing and you're communicating it in a certain way, right? Tools that can facilitate language learning. So students are not just getting meaning verbatim or through listening, but they're doing it through understanding when they're doing an artwork, or they're listening to their peers when they're presenting. You engage your students. In the pandemic, without social media, without movies, without anything, right? We had so many things that we would have gotten so bored if we didn't have the arts. And students learn better when they're like, this wasn't even learning, right? But they are learning. The affective filter is low. Support growth mindsets, resilience, coping skills, mental well-being, and a sense of self, making meaning of life and of themselves. Next. So maybe we apply these already, right? But it's also important that we do it with intention, that we do these things. And sometimes we don't even know we're doing these things, but be intentional, be mindful, and give yourself kudos. You're doing a lot of stuff in your classroom already. Next. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys a break, 5 minutes. All right, so now I'm going to show you some strategies that museums use and that you can maybe use in your classroom. Okay, apply it into your classroom. And this is the practical part of the speaker series. So the first one and we just did it, Party People, was VTS, Visual Thinking Strategies. Next. So visual thinking strategies, you use 3 questions. And so they basically you ask what is going on in this picture, which is the first prompt that I gave you guys to use in the chat, right? The other one is, what do you see that makes you say that? What more can we find? I went into expanding, so I kind of mixed them with another strategy that I'm going to show you, but these are the basic questions to get students thinking about any type of image or a picture or some sort of content that you want to teach, right? Next. So with Party People, okay, basically visual literacy, and this is important, right? Because visual literacy, it's not just important in the visual arts. Visual literacy is everywhere. And your English learners are going to know how to interpret. They have to learn to interpret advertisements and social media and anything that comes at them, right? Because most of everything, even signs, logos, right? Anything is visual literacy. So it's the ability to find meaning in imagery. It involves a set of skills. It could be from simple identifications to some more complex interpretations, kind of like what you guys were talking about, how adults sometimes don't see kids, or, you know, or maybe they're at a party, but they're not present, right? Stuff like that. That's more complex, right? Metaphoric, philosophical aspects of cognition are called upon, such as personal association, questioning, speculating, analyzing, fact-finding, categorizing. Objective understanding is the premise of much of the literacy, but subjective and affective aspects of knowing are equally important in this strategy. Next. These are aesthetic descriptions, and basically these are the types of people, right, in visual thinking strategies that you're going to get. So stage one is the accountive. This is the storyteller. This is where you guys thought, you know, that they were at a party and it's a family. And so you're using your judgments. You're a storyteller. You're telling a story, right? And I want you to keep in mind, I put next to the descriptions, I put something for you guys to remember to kind of analyze what we were talking about before, right? So are they doing higher order thinking as an English learner when they're doing this? Are they doing lower order? Are they low levels? Can they be superior, right? Think about all these things that apply to this strategy. Next. The second type of looker or visual person that you come upon is a constructive. So this one, it's building a framework. This one is about, you know, trees aren't purple. That's weird, right? So it's like that gives it a little lack of value after that, because they think that there has to be some logic to it. Observations have a concrete known reference point. So this is your constructive visual learner. Next. This is the third one is classifying. You have the classifiers, and this one is more analytical. This one is the art historian. This one's that, you know, kind of like, I think, I forgot, I didn't answer Billy, right? But the artist background, right? They want to know more about this because this is important to them, seeing the artwork. They're eager to expand. They want to know like what was behind, like, well, what was the intention of the artist? It can be multi-layered, and it could be that in literature, right? It can be that in history. So again, this is the arts, but how can you apply it to other content? And again, think about the BICs. Think about, are they using just basic skills? Are they using more academic words in this analysis? Next. The fourth type of person is interpretive. This person encountered with a work of art, they learn to appreciate it. They have critical skills that are put in service of feelings and intuitions. There's like aha moments. I got that when I saw Rothko, because a lot of people are like, it's just like colors, but to me, I sat and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was enlightened by it, right? So it's like, this is, it's interactive, it's spontaneous, you're interpreting it, but it doesn't really matter like what is being interpreted. There's no, you kind of like, it's going more into the philosophical aspect of it, right? Next. The fifth looker is recreative. And this one has a long history of viewing and reflecting. This is might be like a more, you know, what kind of level of English language learner, right? And again, when you're talking about English language learning, they might know how to analyze a work of art, right? But they still don't know how to communicate it in the target language. So you have to be conscientious of that. Viewers combine personal contemplation with views that broadly encompass universal concerns. So this is another type of viewer. Next. Another strategy is see, think, wonder. Next. So this one usually encompasses, you have a worksheet, and the students are writing. There's a lot of writing involved. There might be, if you want to present it later on, they can present what they wrote. They can listen to their peers. And lastly, they can read, right? Or they can read, you could put something like, they could put Post-its. And this could be, again, into any content, put into any other type of content, you know, but this is like the strategy that you can use. So the first one is you give them at least 1 full minute. And for the party people, I didn't give you guys that much. I started talking and I started sharing. I got excited on your chat what you guys were sharing, right? So, but it's usually like they give you time to like reflect on it and be still and be with the image or with the whatever you're trying to teach them. And then after they have absorbed, they start writing down all their ideas, right? So the second prompt would be maybe, what do you see? What do you think? And then what do you wonder? So during my dual language program, one of the teachers would, what do you see? What do you think? And what do you wonder? I thought that was cute. So you can use it too. Next. Strategies from the art room. So the other ones were from museums, and this one is from the art room. And from the language, some of them are from the language, like the ELL class or ESL classes that we have taught. Next. So although it's not really popular, sometimes for our low levels, in order for them to grasp, you do want to teach explicitly. You do want to link verbal to visual cues. This was something that one of my professors shared with me that they use in middle school, and where you're teaching, right? Are you teaching BICs or CALPs? And from moving from BICs to CALPs, you have these words that might be difficult for your ELLs, but once they get a visual representation, it's like, okay, I connect it, right? I'm getting that. I can learn it. And you can even take it further. It's like, how would I apply it to writing? How would I use it, right? Visual puns, that was like paper mache that we did like for some visual puns so they can create, because they love creating stuff. Teach grammar visually and invite those differentiated learning, right? You're teaching kinesthetics, you're teaching visuals, you're teaching interpersonal, it could be something in groups. So there's all different ways of teaching this. Next. Connections across curriculums, and this is very important, right? To connect whatever you're teaching to English learners to the real world, because you want them to apply those English, that acquisition to life. And the use of authentic materials, which I was introduced to during my language learning program. Next. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about it because it was a little confusing at first. It's like, well, what is it, right? Like, how am I going to apply it? And I was coming from the art world. So I'm like, it's realia, right? Sometimes. So you have learning materials, you have authentic materials, and you have realia. And sometimes they could be the same thing, but sometimes it's just authentic materials and other times it's realia. So train tickets in the chat. You guys do learning materials is anything that we teach in the class, that we use in the class to teach, right? Anything. Authentic materials are materials that you use in society, and it's not necessary for language learning. It's for societal use. So tickets, so newspapers, blogs, magazines, things that they're going to use that are authentic to the target language, right? That are authentic to, if you're teaching English here in the US, you want to use things that they're using in every day, and you're bringing it to the classroom to learn. Realia can be, so this is where souvenirs get a little tricky, right? And that one was tricky for me because souvenirs is realia, but it's not an authentic material. It was made, so if you're learning Spanish, right? So this is in Guatemala. No, this is in El Salvador. And these are souvenirs, but the natives aren't using this in their everyday. They're selling it to tourists, right? So this wouldn't necessarily be an authentic material because it's not being used in the everyday. So for example, tickets would be authentic materials that you would use, or newspapers or blogs. Manipulatives would not, they'd be learning materials, right? Learning materials or worksheets are things that you create, and they're specifically for learning the target language. So interesting to learn about these things and how you can apply them to your classroom, because the more authentic, the more you bring in authentic materials, the more culturally relevant your classroom is, the more inclusive it is, the more you're teaching culture, the more you're lowering that affective filter. You can maybe role play, it could be silly. It does get fun. Next. Opportunities, give them opportunities to problem solve. And these are things that we do in the art room all the time. Ask students to expand. Sometimes we're like, especially I used to be a high school teacher. I was happy that they would even answer me something. But besides the excitement that you get that my students are actually answering me, you got to expand and help them explain ideas, right? You also want to give them open-ended questions where they're inferring their information, right? They're giving you output, but things that they are now absorbing, they're acquiring language. It's not like a close-ended question where it's like a multiple choice, or you're giving them the answers, or you give them an answer from a book. It's more like open-ended. It's more critical thinking. It's higher order thinking. And that's what you want for your English learners. Constructive criticism. This is very important because at work, you're going to get some feedback, right? You're going to get assessed when you are at a job or we're in another situation. And sometimes our students don't take constructive criticism or feedback. Even we don't take the feedback or the criticism positively, right? And so how can we use this to self-assess and reflect and be better? Parallel talk, this is useful for the lower levels as well, but if you're using higher vocabulary, complex thinking, this can also be helpful to where you're doing something and you're talking at the same time to explain. Support students' independence, student-led activities. And again, you'd be surprised how much our classrooms are still teacher-led. And it's scary for teachers, right? Because we're planners. We love planning and having everything organized for the whole year. And I have my lesson plans, but it's like you have to give some power away, because you ultimately want students to be independent thinkers, right? Next. This is very important because, again, the self-confidence, right? A lot of our students, even I, sometimes I'm doing my doctoral program at the moment. And I talk about this with my classmates. I'm like, I have imposter syndrome, because it's like sometimes you know what you know, but you don't have the confidence, right? So give your students that confidence, help them have that self-esteem. You guys are artists, researchers, scholars, because we are, right? And we have to be empowered, and we have to empower each other. Next. Encourage the 4 language skills whenever possible. Always, help them practice those 4 language skills. And sometimes I have a lot of English learners who, I'm really good at reading, but I can't write, or I really I'm a good writer, but I can't speak very well. So, help them practice all those 4 skills. Next. Exposure in and out of the classroom. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a big field trip. It could be like going out. They love going out. Students like exploring nature. They love exploring, the block in school, like anything. Get them to give them exposure to things. It's very important. People invite speakers to come to your classrooms as well. Next. This one's tough sometimes because you're going to have some very sensitive topics, but you have to have those sensitive topics, right? So encourage your students to be reflective, to dialogue, to have rich discussions, to have those courageous conversations that relate to their experiences. A lot of our students come with traumas. A lot of students come with issues. It's hard to talk. And so the safer a classroom is, the better they're going to be able to communicate and lower that affective filter and be learning about the content. And at the same time, hopefully learning about themselves and their world, right? Next. Help them to do poems, to do storytelling, to find identity and self-reflection in their writing. And again, practice those 4 language skills. It's very important for students to just write, You'd be surprised how many students still in secondary school lack a lot of writing skills. Next. This we tell our students, but sometimes we don't do it ourselves. So we have to learn to be inquisitive. We have to learn to wonder and ask those why questions, right? Come on, we say we're collaborative, we're teachers and this and that, but we live in our world, we live in our classroom, we love it. Like, we love being in our classroom, it's our domain. And sometimes it's hard for us to model that behavior of teamwork. It's hard for us to work with our colleagues. It's hard to collaborate, but we have to do it because we want to model that behavior, right? And we want to have fun. You want to have fun in the classroom. So it's about modeling. And so this was when I was teaching high school, and we did a night of poetry and culture and ethnic studies. And it was amazing. It was really fun. Next. This I got from LACMA, actually. We had an educators night, and they were talking about Colombian natives, and it's the Arhuaco leaders that were talking. And one of the leaders said they were talking to the museum, to the curators about unlearning. And this to me was very profound, right? Because we learn so much, we get to a point where like, we're so academic, we're so knowledgeable, we forget that we have to sometimes unlearn to learn, right? To give that space for students to teach us things, right? Because they all come with things that we could learn. Next. This is also important. I feel that education it's true, it doesn't change the world. It changes people, and it changes us, right? And so how are we going to use this? Right now, I'm not an expert. I don't feel like an expert. I just acquired knowledge that I want to pass to you guys, that you can pass it on to others. so we can have these topics about a very important issue in education, which is English learners, right? Like there's not enough being done. And so how can we support students? I also like this quote from Bell Hooks. As a classroom community, our capacity to generate excitement is deeply affected by our interest in one another, right? Our community, our students, hearing each other's voices and what we have to say and learn from each other and recognizing one another's presence, feeling valued, right? As an English learner, sometimes, again, that stigma can kind of deviate you from, because you feel like the other. And so, giving light, giving value to somebody in your class is very, very important. And it's true, like the students mostly, because I've had some students, my first class that graduated was in 2006. And so I have students that are in their 30s. They don't remember the art, but they talk about something we did or something they talk about how they felt, right? And it's very true. Next. And this is where I'm kind of talking about how you have to relinquish a little control. And we do love to be in control as teachers, but you got to kind of relinquish that control in order to invite lifelong learning, in order to invite independent thinking, critical thinking, and student-led activities that'll be more meaningful to them in the long run. Next. All right, so if you guys have any questions or any comments, we have a couple minutes. I probably have like 3 minutes because we didn't give time in the beginning to Lara to share some things with you, but thank you so much for being here tonight. I know you guys are all tired and you probably went to work, so I thank you so much for sharing some time with me about a very important topic, a very personal topic for me. Thank you.